Have you ever needed a supportive community in your journey to advance racial equity, stop and prevent oppression, and catalyze change in your life or your organization? Join us in our online community at intentionallyact.com. As James Baldwin wrote, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced." Join us online to confront the challenging questions and situations in your journey to advance racial equity as we build community to offer professional, personal, and organizational development, skills, and knowledge.
Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Atyia Martin. Welcome to Intentionally Act Now, a podcast that supports the All Aces mission to activate consciousness, catalyze critical thinking, and transform capabilities that advance racial equity and build resilience within ourselves and our organizations. We feature a wide variety of leading experts in diversity, equity, and inclusion, conflict management, critical race theory, personal growth, and more.
In our second episode of Intentionally Act Live, formerly All Aces on Air, Dr. S. Atyia Martin, CEM, talks to founder, strategy, and mission director of Women in Crisis Response, Godha Bapuji. Dr. Martin and Bapuji discuss cyber incident management versus incident management in the real world. Critical infrastructure, time equity, gender parity are increasing interconnectedness through digital means, and what this all means in terms of advancing racial equity and resilience. Crucially, they also explore the role of passion and how that figures into leading social enterprises as women of color through the lenses of their own stories of growing up surrounded by poverty. A note about the name of the show. In 2020, we were calling it All Aces on Air. In 2021, we renamed the show Intentionally Act Live to more concretely center the show as intentionallyact.com's peer and public engagement engine. Join intentionallyact.com today.
I just want to welcome everyone to All Aces on Air, our regularly scheduled broadcast where we try to interview people in the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion, people who are on the maybe not in the field, but who are making contributions in other fields that have relevance to diversity, equity, and inclusion, with a particular focus on racial equity. And for today, I am so amazingly excited to have the wonderful, and I'm going to get this right. Let's see if I can get this right. Okay. The wonderful Godha Bapuji.
You
Did I
got
get
it right.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
you did.
So,
Thank you.
And the reason why I get so excited about practicing and learning people's names is because it's one of the initial signals to another human being that you acknowledge their existence, that you see them, and that you're bearing witness to their presence in the spaces that we occupy together. And so that's why I wanted to make sure I invested that time. And so what I wanted to do is just kind of say a little bit of, have you talk a little bit about your background. Who are you? Who in the world are you? What do you do? And then we'll jump into the details of the conversation. But help our audience understand, who are you?
Thank you very much, Dr. Atyia Martin, for having me here with All Aces. I'm so happy to be here and also joining you live and speaking to everybody. I am Godha Bapuji, and Personally, I identify as a South Asian woman of Indian origin, and of course, a person of color. I have a teenage daughter myself, and she is a fabulous young woman. I wouldn't say angry young woman, that would make her angry. So my background, I come from India, and I have a background in STEM fields. So I did a diploma in engineering in science with electronics and physics. And I've been in IT, information security, for as long as I can remember, for 25 years or so. And I started off as the typical measly programmer doing the small jobs in the IT field. That was way back when. So it has been a growth. It has been fabulous. I've had amazing relationships over the years, learned a lot of things, and a lot of things through hard knocks. But here I am. And I've lived and worked in multiple continents. So I moved to the US in 2002 and lived in Illinois for a few years before we migrated to England, and lived in London for a few years. And then we came back here, and we are here at the moment. So I feel I'm a global citizen at heart. And go wherever there's people and culture, and because traveling is a way to enjoy and learn more about others. So that's in short who I am as a person.
Wonderful, which is the most important thing, right? Who we are as human beings. Now, tell us what you do today.
At the moment, well, I have to say, I'm obviously here to share with you some of the experiences that I'm facing as I would say, founder of a social enterprise. And the name of the enterprise is Women in Crisis Response. It's not an easy process, and I am no unicorn, frankly speaking. So it is definitely a step, series of steps that needs patience and diligence, and you've got to stick with your idea. So I'm here today to share some of these insights with others, perhaps, who may be starting off like me. We will make mistakes, but we have to be bold enough to make those mistakes, but yet give it a try. We have to do it. So that's why I'm here today. I went back to, as I mentioned earlier, I come from a heavily STEM background with a very heavy engineering mindset, putting the tools to work if you see a problem. But a lot of times tools are not answer. They're not the solution to the problem. And then there's that human element that we tend to forget as engineers. So I went back to school to connect that human element and get a degree in social sciences, because social sciences matters a lot. And oh my gosh, Harvard University does an amazing job. And not because I'm an alumna of Harvard University, but Harvard definitely knows how to empower adults like myself who are hoping and willing to have a second chance at doing something purposeful in their life. And I got a degree in economics with an emphasis in government and international security. And towards the end of my journey with Harvard, I decided that founding this company would be the ultimate result and test of what I've done in these 4 years at Harvard.
And so by this company, you mean Women in Crisis Response?
Yes, that's correct.
So for Women in Crisis Response, you founded this organization. You kind of gave us a trajectory of this part of your personal story, where part of your professional story, and you kind of landed with being the founder of Women in Crisis Response. Now, can you connect the dots for us between how you went from engineering to Women in Crisis Response? Like, what made that connection?
Yes, it is actually. It has been. It was actually challenged in the first year at school, because thinking in, having always thought in the STEM field, and then you have to think differently for social sciences. You have to write differently, and your mind has to speak differently in everything you do. So I did notice this big difference when I first went to school, and I started looking at all sociology and different subjects. So that was one of the biggest challenges. But as an engineer, the core of being an engineer is that you never rest. If you see a problem, you want to find a solution for it. That's who an engineer is. And I think that hasn't changed within me. I may not be a software engineer anymore, but I consider myself an engineer still, because now I want to help out other women, help our communities engineer ideas and solutions to help each other. So it's not changed much, but perhaps I've just sort of expanded the scope of engineering to the social context, if I may say so.
Got it. And if there are, what exactly does Women in Crisis Response do?
So the term crisis response, basically, and Dr. Martin, I know you are a certified emergency manager. You are the expert in this field, so it would be like preaching to the choir. So pardon my measly knowledge, but coming from a cybersecurity field, coming from IT field, we are very much aware of the incident management system as we see it in IT and information security and cybersecurity. So that what pushed me to think about incident management in the real world context. Meaning, we manage incidents in cybersecurity, but there are also incident managers in real world, such as firefighters and all of the emergency managers, the crisis response managers that deal with real world emergencies and incidents. Now, thinking of it as a person in cybersecurity, I know that we are on our way to becoming more and more digitized in our lives. We are getting more and more interconnected in our lives with the internet. Now, this brought me to that intersection saying, hey, we now have to not only think about incident management at the software and hardware level, but also now combine this with the physical incident management system and look at the interconnections between these two, because we have cyber physical systems, what we call in our field as the crucial civic infrastructure that we are dependent on. And now more and more these crucial infrastructures, what we also call them as critical infrastructure, are now digitized and electronically available for services and remote control. So it becomes very clear now that the dot between cyber and real life is a straight line. And that's why, as crisis response organization, the idea is to marry these two concepts to say, hey, we need to really think about cyber in everything we do. We need to build security by design in everything we do within our communities and make our communities resilient for the future that we want to live in. And we are already in that future, so there's no time to waste.
Thank you for that, because I think it's important for people to understand the work of Women in Crisis Response as we go through this conversation for context.
Absolutely.
And I think, as I listen to you, one of the things that I find really exciting is your energy, your passion, and your knowledge, right, about these issues. And so, you talked about the logic behind how you got here, but I'm curious from a passion perspective, from that energy that we're all experiencing from you right now, where does that come from?
That's a very nice question. I would say for passion, and I see it in you as well, Dr. Martin, just right back at you, and in a lot of people that I associate with as my supporters, my cheerleaders, the passion, and I tell them the passion comes from within. It's the fire that drives you, makes you wake up every day because you want to fight for something. And what is that something that you ask for me, that I'm, exuberating so much energy? The thing is, I have to say, I have come from a poor background. I was poor too, and I have felt poverty, and there are still people who I have left behind who are still in poverty. So poverty is one of the most closest thing that I have experienced as an individual. And growing up as a girl in a city, I come from Mumbai, and Mumbai is my most dearest city of all. It's not easy surviving as a girl in Mumbai. And surviving as a poor person is another whole dimension. But My mother consistently kept me on my toes, saying, you've got to have situational awareness around you. You've got to be alert. You can't sleep in the bus. You have to watch people around you. So see, she constantly trained me to be Sherlock Holmesy, in the words of my daughter, to be very alert about my surroundings. I guess that's where my whole risk management attitude kicked into gear, is because of this survival in a city like Mumbai. And despite all of the struggles of poverty, somehow I continued to push through the situations, like many of us who have been here. And then when I got a chance to get out of, for example, generally people who are poor, they get this advice. Oh, you've got to work really hard and get out of poverty. You've got to really put in hard work. But I have to say, frankly, poor people do work hard. So that advice doesn't really go very far. But what poor people do need is that bandwidth to be able to afford to take a risk to do what they want to do. And that bandwidth is not affordable to them. And I know, Dr. Martin, I really like this point. You did also mention this as in one of your TED Talks, that, you can't really talk about poverty to poor people because they just don't have the time to do whatever they want to do because they're busy running their lives. And now that I can afford that time, I want to give back. And that's the passion that drives me forward.
Thank you for that. And, it's everything that you have been talking about really connects back in a lot of different ways, actually, to my life and my experience. I grew up poor. We moved around a lot, all within the city of Boston. I moved around a lot after the fact, as an adult, beyond the borders of Boston. And had to learn how to navigate in a world that wasn't designed for me to thrive, for me to be successful, and figuring out from this time perspective that you talk about. In the TEDx talk you're talking about is about how the relationship between climate change and rate.
Yes, I love that talk.
Thank you. And this piece around time equity, I think is something that we never talk about. I can't claim ownership of the concept. I was inspired by something I was watching, not the same context, but just the aha light bulb moment that so many of us are just trying to make it through the days. We're just trying to figure out how to take care of our families, how to do right by our extended network, the people we love, how to keep a roof over our head, how to navigate and thrive in spite of. And to your point, this idea that there are some of us who have the privilege to be able to do the thing that, statistically speaking, folks say is incredibly hard to do no matter what race you are, but especially if you're a person of color, which is to get out of poverty.
Yes.
Right. And so as folks who have transitioned out of poverty in many ways, there's still a sense, the importance of giving back, the importance of acknowledging that in a non-paternalistic way.
Correct.
There are people in the community who are just in the middle of real life. And there are some of us who are privileged enough to not have to be in the middle of the same pace of hecticness of life that comes with being in poverty. Correct. All of the decisions you have to make, all of the trade-offs that have to happen all day long, in addition to all the amount of time we spend just trying to navigate, because most of our neighborhoods are hard to navigate around. So just getting from place to place is time consuming. And so for those of us who know that that's a reality, to leverage that privilege in a way that supports other people, that helps to bring voice when we can't bring the people who are living the experience into the space,
Yes.
be able to bring their voice into the space, the
Correct.
challenges into the spaces that we're in. And so, from an emergency management perspective, for women in crisis, and with this idea of there's some of us who have the ability to do this, that have the privilege to do this, in supporting their community and other folks. What if I am an emergency manager, right? And I am, trying to figure out, where does woman in crisis response fit in? How would I plug in to the work that you do?
Okay.
And so I'm pivoting back to women in crisis response, and really want to want folks to understand how it actually works, because most
Okay.
of them don't, aren't experts in emergency management. And crisis response is like a thing we see on TV, and some of us have experienced it as
Yes.
on the other end. But
Yes.
what happens behind the scenes is invisible,
Yes.
especially to folks who are living in poverty and are struggling. And so, help us understand what that actually looks like in real life.
Sure. Thank you. So, given my background in, let's say, risk management or incident management, or my learning about crisis management, it is sort of nicely divided into 4 levels. So you've got the initial response when something happens, and then you've got the recovery process, because after the initial response, you go into the recovery mode. So if you were to think of COVID as an example, and I'm giving this example because it fits in our current context to help people visualize it. So the initial few months from, let's say, for our country in the US here, March, April, May seemed to be that initial response phase where we were all in the response mode, trying to figure out, there was that panic situation. We couldn't figure out things because we were still figuring out COVID-19. So the response comes with all of this package. And then we slowly switched over into, okay, we've got it, sort of figured it out. Now we've got to provide recovery services to people who have been impacted by it. So that's a second phase. Now, we might want to think we are currently in the recovery phase, but in a lot of places, we're still in response phase.
And you're referring to COVID-19.
The COVID-19 pandemic, yes. And then the next one is, let's assume COVID-19 pandemic recovery phase is done in a few months, and then we are at the reconstruction phase, where we help communities rebuild the business, the losses that they have incurred. So we are helping communities. So that is sort of the third phase we enter into. And the final phase would be building resilience into our communities, so that when such a thing happens next time, the better policies that we will design, the better community services that we provide, when a next pandemic should occur, if it should occur, then we will be better prepared for it. Mm-hmm. So these are sort of the 4 logical structures that we can think of in a response cycle. Now, Women in Crisis Response wants to primarily focus on the resilience and the recovery phases. We want to make sure we build in resilience into our communities and help people realize what needs to be done in order to face this situation or a similar situation or a similar crisis in a better way. And what happens to those who are disproportionately impacted. We are here as a team to help those individuals or families or communities as a team. So that is our core sort of focus. We plan to also interact with actual crisis response teams if necessary, but that is at the moment in our first phase not the entire focus of our organization's mission. So in order to do build resilience and recovery, we obviously use education and awareness as the most important tool to create this awareness of what is a threat, what are vulnerabilities, why should we be prepared for such things, and how can we do it? And also the situational awareness of people around you and how we can help them. So Women in Crisis Response wants to really focus on this aspect of the response and the crisis. I hope that makes sense.
That does make sense. And so, if I'm checking my understanding, the idea here is that women in crisis response wants to be involved in every phase of the emergency management process, right?
Yes.
When disasters happen.
Yes.
That right now in your development, and I heard you say, phase one or stage one, that
Yes.
you're right now, the focus really is on the preparedness side, right?
Correct.
Um, Focusing on preparing communities to be able to leverage what they do have in order to take the actions that they can take.
Yes.
So, do you focus on and I know the answer to this question, but I want to make sure that folks watching know the answer to this question, which is, do you focus on any particular population or group in terms of who you recruit for volunteers, or who you actually are serving in terms of the work that you're doing?
That's a great question. So one of, as the title, of the organization might suggest, we say women in crisis response, but here's the thing. We are definitely in this fight to achieve gender parity. We want to make sure that women, of those who are disproportionately impacted or marginalized, women and women as adults or children are impacted and marginalized in a lot of the crises that happen. So we want to make sure we are paying exclusive attention to them, but that is not to say we don't care about others. It's definitely not the case. In our case, I say the table is round. So it's all about equity. And we want to make sure we are caring and we are there for everybody, but our focus is primarily women and girls, women and children. Having said that, there are other important social constructs that we have to fight as we provide these services. And one of them is the challenges that people of color face. So diversity and inclusion is definitely one of those essential things that is part of everything that we do within Women in Crisis Response. And this is also the population that we want to focus on because they are marginalized in a crisis. So in terms of who I bring on board as volunteers, the only request I have for my volunteers is if you're passionate and you have the time to commit, please do join us. So you've got to have the same fire for something that you care about burning within you to come and join me to help me. So that is the kind of request that I have. But also my intention is not to alienate our menfolk, and I call them the few good menfolk that we have who understand why we talk about women so much and why women need so much help, or why we need to really pay serious attention to gender parity. There are a lot of men champions who understand this, and I definitely encourage such men to join us because we need them with us to fight this fight. We cannot leave them alone. So although we say women in crisis response, we are a group of men and women, all genders inclusive, to help sort of tackle this situation of gender disparity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a interesting framing, especially with my focus being on confronting racism and advancing racial equity, personally and professionally through all ACEs. We have a similar framing, and I think it could be helpful to your organization as well, which is, so yes, people of color and white people need to be working together on dismantling racism and really looking at how do we advance racial equity? What does it mean to reimagine who we are, how we are in the world, how we connect with each other, how we structure our organizations, and how all of those pieces fit together.
Correct.
Including how we see ourselves
Yes.
in all of that. And so because of that, it's not just work that people of color need to do, and it's not just work that white people need to do.
Correct.
You hear people who have both of those positions.
Yes.
Not at the same time. I'm talking about two groups of
Yes.
ideas. When the ideas that we want people to have, understand that it takes all of us. Now, the next level is why, right? And the why is because racism is also harmful to white people.
Yes.
Not in a reverse racism kind of way, but more in the sense that it's a type of conformity. That's a two-sided coin. In that conformity requires or expects that people of color will show up in certain ways. And there are plenty of ideas and stereotypes that are reinforced on a regular basis.
Right.
Ideas influence us and how we navigate, but that's just one side of the coin, right? The other side of the coin is, well, we're being compared against someone. We're being compared against this conformity, this bar of normalcy that is really whiteness. And so, which means that there are expectations for white people too. How they're supposed to show up.
Yes.
How they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And how they are, with the limitations that are placed on them. So concrete, right? You're supposed to show up, and you're supposed to be the most educated, have the most money. You're supposed to vacation a certain way. You're supposed to celebrate holidays a certain way. All of these things, which in both instances, someone is basically trying to tell us what our identity is.
Yeah.
How we're supposed to fit into that identity.
Absolutely.
And I think when we're talking about the same thing with kind of gender equity and dealing with sexism, it's the same philosophy and principle, right? But if women are expected to be one way, that means men are expected to be a certain way too.
Yes.
If that's not really who you are.
Correct.
And so you must trim the edges and sometimes the core of your humanity to fit into the boxes that have all these labels on them.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And I'd be interested in kind of what you think about that, and if that's something that you and your volunteers and your team talk about.
Yes, absolutely. We have spaces created to discuss exactly these things. And one of the most important threads that I would like to mention is Women in Crisis Response is the core foundation of Women in Crisis Response is based on United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325, which was passed in October 2000. And the resolution acknowledges the role of women and the impact that women have in all aspects of our society and cultures. But it also emphasizes the need for us to provide equity to women because women are not at the right places that they're supposed to be. Whereas they are usually on the receiving end, whether, be it receiving end of the discrimination or receiving end of the impact from the decisions that are usually made in proxy by men. So it's a very wonderful way, and it was a milestone for United Nations and for women globally. And throughout the past few years, I think I have found that this is one of the core missions that I would be willing to drive for the rest of my life. And that's why I founded Women in Crisis Response under this core foundation. And the other aspect that Women in Crisis Response organization is built on is human security. And the United Nations Human Development Report, I think it was 1994 or 95, that actually came out with a very good definition of what human security is. And it has about 7 pillars, which talks about food security, economic security, human security, political security, different aspects. And I think as women, we experience discrimination in all these pillars of human security. So these are the 2 core principles which I use as a foundation for Women in Crisis Response. So we do create spaces within our teams to make sure we talk about this because this is what we live for. And this is what the organization does primarily. The bottom line is everything is abuse of power due to capital ownership. And that's what we think. And what is the capital? In terms of racism, the capital is color, caste, or heritage in many parts of the world. In monetary terms, the capital is money, or wealth that gives someone that power. In terms of social and cultural matters, gender and sometimes age brings that power to someone. Being a male or being an elder gives you that power to make decisions on behalf of someone. So in all of this, a crucial capital seems missing, and that is that human capital, the social capital. And the fact that we are humans and we are inherently social beings, and we are designed to move from place to place in look for better livelihood for our kith and kin. We're not trees. So, we don't have our roots grounded in the earth. So we move, and that's who we are inherently. I think we tend to forget this in all of the proxy decision making we do. And I think that's why human security really rings a bell with me, and it's very dear to my heart because it embodies the values that we want to live and give our future generations. The equity.
Mm-hmm. And how the human security is almost in many ways the international context or parallel for social determinants of health.
Yes.
And so it's this idea that there are all of these aspects of our lives that impact our overall health.
Correct.
Physical, all of those pieces.
Correct.
It's everything from housing to food security, kind of all of the things that you just mentioned. And when I think about where there are these opportunities for us to not just shift the narrative and reframe things for people in terms of understanding the problems.
Yeah.
That there's also an opportunity for us to get clear about what we're striving towards.
Correct.
And I think, in a lot of conversations that deal with oppression, we oftentimes live in the problem space.
Correct.
The definitions and all of those things. But the reality is, and the question that I feel like I know I had, when I first started really going down all these rabbit holes to learn more about racism and what it is and how it works and how it impacts us and all these pieces. It really was this attempt to get at yes, and what do we do about it?
Correct.
What do we do about it? And so in your instance, you're talking about kind of actions that you're taking through Women in Crisis Response to address challenges. And so I'm curious if someone asked you, what is the answer, right? What should we be doing in order to address gender inequities? The Women in Crisis Response role, but what would you say to folks who are watching who are like, yeah, but what do you do big picture?
Yeah. So the first and the foremost thing is for people, for us, everybody, to realize that such a problem exists. That is a first step to solving any problem, acknowledging the problem. And as an organization, we hope to shed light on the problems that come because of gender disparity, because of racial disparity, and now because of digital disparity that is added onto the existing traditional disparities that were already in our lives. Which means, as we may have seen during this COVID pandemic, certain parts of our country were more impacted, and certain services were not available for certain groups of people. So one might want to think about it as to why that happens. That happens because of a term we use now. sociology fans might know Johann Galtung. He uses the term structural violence.
Mm-hmm.
So the structural violence is the one that you also talk about, Dr. Martin, is all of the structure that has been designed to make us fail. It is not conducive to the growth of the other. And it is only conducive to the growth of those who have that power of the capital that I just mentioned, the different capitals that each of the groups own. So it is only conducive to them. So this is essentially what we need to do, is first realize that this problem is true and it exists. And that comes with a lot of education awareness. I know there's a lot of stuff out there already, and then we sort of are in this analysis paralysis stage, too much information from all directions. But we still have to distill that information and present it to those who really need it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the things that we ought to do as multiple organizations, not just one organization here and there. We have to come as a collective force. And that's, I think, very important. As social enterprises, as social organizations, each one of our missions matter, and it's a drop in the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
It is not a race that we are in. We have to do this together to reach a common goal of equity for all. So I think that's what is the core message that we have to do. Now, there are other things that we will do and we will be doing is, actually reach out to people and provide services, simple services that, a lot of us do provide, providing laptop, providing digital access, or providing digital literacy, financial literacy. In short, empower women in every possible way that holds her back. And I call that, in one of the things I say, it's not about the glass ceiling for me. It's not about, shattering the glass ceiling. That's a modern term. But what's more difficult for women is to break the ironclad barriers, the traditional barriers, the metaphorical ironclad barriers that keep us from going further, that keep us from going farther. And I think as Women in Crisis Response, we want to help women break these barriers so that they can realize that they are an individual of themselves and not an object or property to be owned by another, and that need guarding as a property. So they are not capital ownership for others. They are their own capital.
Well, I want to pause there because I think there's a parallel. There's a couple of things you said. So number one, I want to lift up this idea of how we understand the problem, right? Like we want to, a lot of times we want to jump to solutions before we understand the problem. But also this, the idea of collective power, right? So, and we know that power has layers to it, just like oppression does.
Yes.
And so this first layer of power that you ended with was really our power within and our power to, right? Our understanding of ourselves, who we are, and all of the possibilities, our strengths, and really exploring those things, the things that we're passionate about, the things that drive us. And power two really is about our agency. Correct. And recognize that in any situation, we always have a choice.
Yes.
We always have action that we can take.
Correct.
Even in the face of structural violence or systemic oppression, racism, sexism, classism, that we always have some things that we can be doing.
Yes.
And not to allow anyone to take that power away from us. And then in the same breath as you landed, you started to talk about this idea of how we as individuals can leverage that power to that agency. And so I wanted to kind of connect the dots in landing with power with, right? That collective power. Then when we come together, especially when we're building those other kinds of power for ourselves as individuals, that when we come together collectively, we can actually accomplish a lot more than I can with my landscape of action I can take as an individual, right?
Correct.
Expand my impact, by collaborating with other folks who have similar values and kind of have and see a similar vision that we're working towards together. And a lot of this you can find ideas around these things folks can find on intentionallyact.com, which is our online learning community, where we're
Yes.
really evolving and growing it based on our user input. But the idea here is that this work is hard.
Yes.
It There's a lot of noise, and the more that we learn about these issues, the lonelier it can get, because very few people really have taken the time to learn at the same depth. And so you oftentimes, I know I speak for myself, I know I oftentimes find myself in conversations where I have to do a lot of explaining, right? You can't, you're always contextualizing and teaching and things like that, which brings me to my next point around your organization is a nonprofit, and my organization is a for-profit, but both of us have social enterprises, right? You're a social enterprise because by inherently nonprofits are supposed to be social enterprises. They're supposed to be there to support a mission and be mission driven, and address challenges within the communities that they're serving. For us as all ACEs, we're a social enterprise because we're also a mission-based organization. We're values driven, and all of the work we do really is squarely focused on making sure that we're advancing racial equity, and we're building resilience for people and organizations to continue to stay in the work, because it's a journey. And so,
Yes.
and I think everything that you've shared about the work you're doing with women in crisis response comes back to the value and importance of social enterprises. That we're filling in a gap. We're addressing issues that a lot of folks don't want to deal with, right? Including sometimes government. And so I'm interested from your perspective, what recommendations would you give to some other young lady or even young man who wants to step into this role of contributing to a vision bigger than ourselves, who wants to fill in the gaps in society? What would you tell them in order to be able to be a part of this ecosystem of organizations who are working very intentionally towards doing that?
That's a very beautiful question, and I can definitely. I'm, of course, no expert in this, and I'm a beginner in this whole realm of social enterprises. So I can just share my experiences here with others. Now, and I have faced this trouble myself too. I think the journey from the idea, that passion, the burning desire that keeps you up every day, you want to do something about it. That is the most important thing that you need to always keep alive, whether you can do it today or maybe resources don't allow you to do it today, but you want to do it in 5 years. So keep that alive. And always try to reevaluate the strategies to make sure to do a reality check. Is it still applicable on the time horizon that you're in currently? So that reality check really helps. In my case, poverty existed. It still exists. And it is going to be there for a few more years unless we all collectively act on it. And gender discrimination exists. So it's here to stay. So the time horizon was relevant for me. So that was the first thing. The second thing was to say the point that you pointed very accurately, Dr. Martin, is about, you are a for-profit organization. Now, I juggled with this for a really long time. So when I founded the idea of Women in Crisis Response, the distance, I say, between founding and incorporating it as such with the legal entity, that is the longest distance mentally that you can travel, I feel. is because I'm still juggling with the question is, do I really want to be a nonprofit? Is it really, does it give me the mileage that I want to really do by being a nonprofit? Or do I want to be a for-profit? But there's also other categories that a lot of people are still not aware of. There's a category called a for-benefit organization, who are sort of the middle ground between nonprofits and for-profits. And there's the B Corp, which maybe a lot more people know about, is where you have this B Corp entity that gives you, it's a very stringent certification system where you can say that you conform to these requirements and you are therefore a benefit corporation. So that is the ultimate, maybe you can vie for it. So for example, Patagonia is a great example of a B Corp. They are a registered B Corp. So someday I hope Vicar will, become a B Corp like that in, I don't know, maybe 5 years or whatever. But that's a sort of a lofty goal for me right now. Right now, I need to think about what is my earned income in terms of business speak, and how do I want to bring in revenues? We definitely want to bring in revenues through donations. And that's something that I would encourage others to think as well. Think about how you want to get your income. Donations and charities are a great way. So you do your fundraising that way. That's definitely one of my most preferred ways. I decided that Wicker will not be an investor-led organization. So we are not taking any investors, monetary investors, so to speak. Wicker will not have shareholders. So we don't have shareholders. So we are sort of the social enterprise that I want Wicker to look like would be a combination characteristic of a nonprofit, a for-profit, and a for-benefit entity. So it has the characteristics of all these three. And the profits that we make, let's say, are directly routed back into all of the services that we do for our community. So there's no return on investment per se. I've literally, I say, banished the word. We're not going into that quintessential ROI trap. So it is returns to society, returns to community, because we exist on this earth, on this planet. It's a cost to our ecosystem. And as Wicker, the goal is to make sure that our social impact is higher than the social cost we incur as a result of us being here. So these are some of the toughest questions that I've had to juggle with in terms of, not just the idea of what Vicar wants to do, who I want to be, what should be the personality of my organization, but also in terms of the legalities of incorporating it and how do I want to incorporate it eventually. So I hope for those of our individuals who are watching this live here today with us, this should help sort of create a roadmap if you have any ideas, burning ideas in your head, and you want to create an organization or social enterprise. There are a lot of examples for you to get help on the internet, and our Massachusetts state does have the state website is really wonderful, and you can always pick up a call and talk to a representative. They're very good. I did that, and I asked them, hey, what do I do? Should I be a nonprofit or should I be a benefit corporation? And they were very kind to walk me through the different pros and cons. So I recommend, if you're really thinking of something like that, take your chances. Don't be afraid to make mistakes and reach out to people. One challenge that I did face, Dr. Martin, and I would like to share this, is if you are a social enterprise and you have sort of the unique perspective at doing things and not want to fit in the typical business framework, business school framework, the pressure is on by your peer group to conform to the status quo of all the businesses around you. The question is, oh, how can you not have shareholders? Oh no, how can you not have this? How can you not have that? So the question is, the pressure is always on to conform to things around you. But here's the thing, if you conform to things around you, then you're never going to make a difference. So we have to have the courage to stand out, not abrasively, but you have to stand out and look at it from a different perspective and think about it out of the box. Who do I really want to be and how I want to do it to make the maximum impact that I want to do.
Thank you for that. And I know in our last few minutes, this idea of how people can get involved. So number one, I'll just reaffirm that All Aces, as I was building All Aces, I was going through the same challenges, thought processes, all of those pieces, and intentionally, to your point, worked really diligently to not do things that we know don't work.
Yes.
But we doing them because we haven't paused long enough to learn and explore different possibilities. That much of what happens with innovation, from just a purely innovation perspective, not technology, but innovation, that can lead to technology, but also leads to social enterprise and social change, really is about bringing together, not always creating these things from scratch,
yes,
but taking pieces of things we already understand about the world, and using them, using a different discipline or a different lens to re-examine the things that we care about or that we're trying to change or shift.
true.
And so for folks who are thinking about, the thing that you're most passionate about and how you want to influence it, whether it's through a formal organization or just in terms of you as an individual kind of building a coalition around the matters, that we're always exploring outside of the usual industry or sector or discipline that we're in, to be able to come up with these reimagined framings of the issues, as well as different ways of approaching them to
Correct.
The other thing I'll add is, we, on the screen, folks have seen the ticker scroll across, saying that there was going to be the social enterprise networking event. I recommend that you write down or type in your notes intentionallyact.com, so that, and we'll post the link there, because I know that it's a really long link. And if you haven't caught it yet, we'll make sure that that's available for you on intentionallyact.com. And I really want to land this conversation in a place of hope.
Yes.
So let's close out, as our colleagues who are behind the scenes, Rico Manalo and Miles Green, who are the logistical and technical geniuses, who have pulled all of this together, and including All Aces on Air in all of the sessions, but this session as well, that I want to thank them for all the work that they do.
Same here.
And I also want to have us close out in their spirit of, in 30 seconds or less, what is the most important thing that you would like people to walk away from this conversation with? Because we've talked about a lot. What would you like people to walk away from this conversation with?
That's really a great way to close up. So I want people to think and understand that our lives are interconnected now, especially more so with the internet. So when we think of risks, please think about interconnected risks and not in isolation. Think about the cascading impacts one might have if the internet were to be lost. We need to prepare for that. That's our business continuity plan, and that's our disaster recovery plan. That's one thing. And the second thing is, think of cyber realm, nothing different from our physical life, because the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that exists in our real lives will transcend into the cyber realm. So there's the digital disparity, and then there's algorithmic bias that clearly draw a dot between what exists in real life and what will exist in the cyber realm. Let's think about that and address that before it becomes a monster. And then the third one is, let's think about the real world inequities and now think how it amplifies in the cyber realm.
Mm-hmm.
and not miss out those who were traditionally lost. We lost touch with them in the real world. We need to make sure we don't lose touch with them in the cyber realm. So these are the 3 core things I would want to leave people with.
So thank you so much for being with us. We are at time. Only thing I will add is for everyone watching, please visit intentionallyact.com in order to see the replay of this video, as well as to learn more about racial inequity and equity in general, as well as oppression, the problem that we're trying to solve for. And just sending lots of love, hope, and action to everyone who has been watching. Remember the question in terms of oppression and racism is with us. And in terms of racial equity, social justice, we're also the answer. So
True.
I appreciate all of you, and I hope you have an amazing rest of your day.
Thank you, Dr. Martin.
You've been listening to Intentionally Act Live from our website, intentionallyact.com. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Submit your stories and questions for future episodes by emailing us at info@allacesinc.com.